Welcome to the Learning Core podcast. This is your stand-in host, David Cataba, recording from Washington, D.C. Last summer, we recorded a series of conversations exploring gun violence in America for the Check-In podcast, the show that I host, focusing on the work of innovative peacemakers working to transform the violence in our communities into lasting flourishing. We brought in a multiplicity of voices, including pastors, community organizers, and artists, working explicitly with faith communities and otherwise to not only define the issue and name its sources, but also cast the imagination for a world beyond it. We think you will be challenged and inspired by their diverse insights. We were so excited to share this with you all last fall when our attention was diverted by the horrific attacks of October 7th and the 9-month-long campaign in Gaza ever since that has led to unimaginable suffering ongoing in this very moment. Still today, we remain focused on working to end the ongoing horrors in Gaza, release all of the captives, end the occupation, and develop a viable path forward towards justice and peace in Israel-Palestine. And we wanted to return to this conversation now. June is Gun Violence Prevention Month here in the U.S., as we think these conversations are so rich and might even inform some of the ways we are advocating in this moment. And we didn't feel it was right to sit on them any longer. We've left the original introductions in so you can be reminded of the context within which they were recorded. So bear with us if they sound a little funny to your 2024 ears. Nevertheless, the insights from our guests are evergreen, and these issues haven't gone anywhere in the meantime. Folks, we have an invitation before us. Let's take up the call of peace. With that, enjoy the show. There were 61 active shooter incidents, a terminology used by the FBI for what the media would call mass shootings, in 2021. There were only 3 in the year 2000. Our communities are in crisis. Not only are the communities facing the greatest amount of gun violence every day, but also those who feel the need to arm themselves with deadly weapons out of fear of daily living. Something is wrong. We have a problem. As peacemakers, we have to be willing to see and name that problem. It's the first practice of peacemaking, listening to understand. We have to see the world as it is before we can hope to heal it. These conversations that we're having will help us to better see and name what that problem is. But peacemakers don't stop there. They also look ahead. They look for ways to imagine something new, a vision of flourishing for all of us. Violence transformed into justice, reconciliation, and flourishing. So what is that vision and how do we get there? To answer that question, we're inviting a number of brilliant, creative, and courageous peacemakers finding innovative solutions to help us break free of our past and write a new future when it comes to gun violence. They are calling each of us to claim the agency and responsibility to be a part of this movement, and we are so excited to hear from them. Today's guest is Michael Allen, co-founder and co-CEO of Together Chicago, a cross-sectional organization that exists to be a catalyst for lasting change by reducing gun violence and increasing thriving communities in the city of Chicago. Together Chicago focuses on 5 areas: economic development, educational achievement, violence reduction, gospel justice, and faith community mobilization to transform gun violence in the city of Chicago. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today. Where are you checking in from?
Hey, thanks, DCAT. And we are checking in from Chicago, from the great city of Chicago. Hello, everybody, and thanks for listening in.
Well, before we dive into the issues, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about who is Michael, a little bit about your story and how you ended up in this position.
So I am married. Her name is Marilza, and she's from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And we've been married 29 years this year, and we have 4 children. And they have brought to us a beautiful grandson whose name is Elias. That's a little bit about my immediate family. Originally born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. and lived there the first 9 years of my life before immigrating with my family to Fort Lauderdale. So I finished growing up in Fort Lauderdale and went into computer electronics as a first career. And during that time, servicing Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties with my company, I sensed a call of God for full-time ministry. Really enjoyed my studies. Did my Master of Divinity with an emphasis in urban ministry. Attending Moody Church, where I started Evangelism Explosion and did an internship there, and ended up being called to serve at Moody Church. I was the first person to break the color barrier on the pastoral staff at the Moody Church. You think about that. Moody Church was founded in 1864. And you're looking at the guy who broke the color barrier on the staff there. It's a crazy thing. And then left Moody and went down to Sagemont Church in Houston, where I served as associate pastor of world evangelism under Dr. John Morgan at Sagemont, an SBC church. I was there for about 3 years. And then about 18 years ago, came back to Chicago to serve as lead pastor at Uptown Baptist Church. And there I was the first senior pastor of that church that's of color, and served there for 15 years until God really kind of flushed me out of that pulpit, and now I pastor outside the walls of the church on the streets of Chicago, pastoring former gang chiefs and the guys that they are recruiting, the young guys, in the organization I co-founded with my dear friend David Dillon, who is a very successful business guy, elder in his Presbyterian church. So you have a white, business guy, elder in his Presbyterian church, Black Baptist pastor, who co-founded this organization to try to reduce gun violence in the city of Chicago and increase thriving communities. And so we've been going at it about 6 years.
It's encouraging to see the ways that also you've been pulled back into life and ministry in Chicago. You were there earlier in your life. You came back. You've been there for about 2 decades now. I'd love to hear, before we dive further into the work of Together Chicago, to hear from you what it's like to call that place home. What makes your community special? Why have you decided to stay there?
Well, Chicago obviously is a world-class city, and it's a city filled, like many big cities, with a plethora of people from all over the world. Just in the two neighborhoods, the church neighborhood where our church is, Uptown, and where I live in Rogers Park, those are two of the most ethnically, socioeconomically diverse neighborhoods in the city. So we have the 77 neighborhoods in the city, and these two neighborhoods where I live currently and used to work at Uptown. In the public schools, you might have 80 or 90 languages spoken in the public schools, which is incredible. So I love the diversity and the beauty of the city, but it's also, as in most cities, it's a place of great brokenness. So there's beauty and brokenness all at the same time, with all kinds of social ills. And I choose to live in the city. I've never lived in the suburbs. I love the hustle and bustle of the city. I love the ethnic diversity and the socioeconomic diversity of the city. And I love being close to Lake Michigan. I've always lived near a large body of water, starting out in the island of Jamaica and then a peninsula of Florida, and now the great city of Chicago, which is on the shores of the great Lake Michigan. And so for all those reasons, I love the city, and I love what God is doing here. I mean, I've lived in the city long enough to remember the time when the city was divided a lot more than it is now. It was divided along racial lines, it was divided among geographic lines, and also divided among ecumenical lines or religious distinctions. But now what we see with the uptick of violence at pandemic levels, we're seeing God break down those walls of isolation that separated us, walls of division and silos. And now people from different economic and social economic levels are now coming together. People, different religious groups are coming together. And then the business community, the legal community, and the church are coming together to work on this issue of violence. And so I love that about the city of Chicago. I think God is just doing something special, bringing people together to pray. I mean, we started this with Dr. John Feuder of Moody Bible Institute and Roy Patterson. We started asking pastors to just gather to pray about 15 years ago or so, and on the campus of Moody. And out of that little group came this movement of praying for our city and praying against the violence. And now we have an annual gathering every January or February where 2,000 to 3,000 people come to pray for the city from all over the city and the surrounding suburbs. Red, yellow, black, and white, rich, poor, middle class, Pentecostals, Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians. It's amazing. And for all those reasons, I love the city of Chicago.
That's really special to hear, and just to get a picture of why you love your city and the beauty that comes with it, because in this work, in the work of peacemaking and justice, a lot of it is staring in the face of the darkness, right? And holding on to that vision of the beauty and of the joy is really essential to keep moving and to keep transforming that darkness into flourishing. And one of the reasons I was so struck learning about your organization is the way that you're bringing folks across so many different communities and sectors together. I think that's really powerful work and really necessary. And I want to circle back to that later on in this conversation. But before we get there, I do want us to face down that darkness and discuss what are those social ills? What's the depth of the problem facing Chicago? From an outsider's perspective, I've never lived in Chicago. I've only visited once. From my understanding or experience, it gets a national spotlight for gun violence, and that's also in some ways just a symptom of some other issues, some deeper issues beneath the surface, and issues that, from what I can tell, it sounds like Together Chicago is really trying to address as well. So can you walk us through what's the depth of the issue, particularly of gun violence, and then how does that connect to some of the deeper issues facing your community?
Chicago, of the top 3 most populous cities in the country, we are the worst when it comes to gun violence. We have more gun violence incidents here than in any other large city. However, on the other hand, if you look at the per capita gun violent incidents, we are not even in the top 10 per capita for other smaller cities. But nonetheless, the sheer number of violent incidents here in our city, it's really at pandemic levels, and so and there are many factors that drive the violence, but it's really bad. And what's interesting, it's really focused in, as I mentioned a moment ago, Chicago is a city of neighborhoods, and there are only about 20 neighborhoods of the 77 that drive probably 95% of all the shootings. So what we're trying to do as a collective of organizations, or about maybe 24 organizations across the city that are working as community violence interrupters or community violent interventionists, we're working together collaboratively so that we can scale to all the neighborhoods. So in fact, I just came back, and the reason I'm in the shirt and tie today, I don't normally wear a shirt and tie, but I'm in a shirt and tie today because I was at the Economic Club of Chicago downtown with probably 1,000 business leaders, CEOs and entrepreneurs, and talking with, and President Preckwinkle was there, president of the Cook County Board, several deputy mayors were also there. And Arnie Duncan was there, former Secretary of Education under President Obama, who now leads one of the CVI organizations, and we partner with him as well. But we're putting together a plan to really scale our violence intervention initiatives across those 20 neighborhoods in the city. So that we've got a plan within the next 5 years, we want to see 50% reduction in those numbers. and then another 5 years after that, another 50% reduction. And so we're asking the business community as well as the government, private foundations to really fund these initiatives at the scale that's necessary because we believe that's what New York did. So New York and LA both did that because um, until about 2002 or 2006, New York, LA, Chicago had pretty similar violent numbers of gun violent incidences. And then suddenly those two cities began investing in a collective impact type way that then saw those numbers plummet, and ours not only didn't stay the same or didn't go down, but ours continued to rise because we didn't invest in the way that those cities did. So now, looking at that historic drop in numbers and what New York did, what LA did, we're saying to our government leaders and our civic leaders to say we've got to do the similar thing. We've got to invest so that we can change our narrative and we can change the outcomes, and kids can go out and play in the park, and we can see those numbers come down, and people won't have to be afraid to come to Chicago, and it won't be in the news for all the wrong reasons, and so on. So I'm optimistic for the future and in terms of where we're going and how we're going to get there.
Michael, what are some of the things that they invested in? What are some of the projects or investments that you would specifically be looking for?
So one is, for example, in the room today was BMO Harris, one of the executives with a bank by the name of BMO Harris Bank, Bank of Montreal, that's here in Chicago. And JP Morgan folks were also in the room. And so those organizations are actually planning to build brick and mortar banks in the neighborhoods that have been disinvested, where there may be a food desert because the grocery stores have pulled out. Manufacturing have pulled out of those neighborhoods, so there's no manufacturing jobs anymore. There's no banks in the neighborhood, so people, they're bank deserts. If you can imagine, picture tens of thousands of people living in a neighborhood where there's no bank and there's no major grocery store. There's little mom and pop shops where you can buy junk food, but no grocery store where you can get fresh meats and produce and etc. So Chicago has neighborhoods like that, and so we're challenging the business community to reimagine what it looks like to do business in these neighborhoods where there's high poverty and high crime. So that's one kind of investment, and then also encouraging the civic community to hire the gang members or when they are graduates of our programs. So we have a lot of programs for guys coming out of the streets, out of the violent gangs, and we take them through various courses where they get mental health treatment, trauma informed mental health treatment, as well as job training, finishing up a GED, so that they can have basic skills of education to go on and get jobs that they can have a career in, a career track. And so we're saying to the civic community, you've got to be willing to take a chance on these guys once they graduate from our programs, because typically those guys, nobody wants to touch them, right? You got an X on your back, you are a former criminal that served time in prison, and there are a lot of jobs that are not open to you, a lot of opportunities. So we're saying, if these guys come through a program, let's give them an opportunity for redemption in that sense, in terms of a work environment, and give them another chance at life. So those are some things, in investing in brick and mortar, grocery stores, banks, and then hiring guys from the community. Those are some major investments that we need. And then investing in the organizations, the nonprofits that are doing this work on the front lines in the trenches with the gangs.
That holistic approach is really inspiring and encouraging to hear about, because there's so many systemic barriers to the way in which violence keeps people in poverty and in violence, right? It feeds off of itself, and so you have to acknowledge all of the different factors that are coming together to enforce that cycle. And I'm struck by, I mean, you have these 5 pillars, and you're kind of walking through some of the programs you have in each of them, as you were just saying. But can you share more about how what those 5 pillars are doing, and how they all work together to create this opportunity to break that cycle, and how all of them, are necessary for that process?
Absolutely. And let me just say, as I know you guys, started your work primarily in Israel among the Palestinians and Jews, and I've had the privilege to travel to Israel at least 4 times, maybe 5 now, and I've led several tours to Israel, and we've had Jewish tour guides and Palestinian tour guides, and we've gone into the Palestinian areas and, of course, the Jewish areas, and we see the disparities and we hear the stories and some of the same struggles that the Palestinians have, the African Americans and the Latinos are having here in their neighborhoods. And then we've talked to them and I've heard them. I had a chance to sit down one year with the first female mayor of Bethlehem, Mayor Baboon. And we asked her for 15 minutes. She gave us like 2 hours and told us her story and the story of her husband who was killed in the Second Intifada, and how she studied Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass and all these African American civil rights leaders and justice warriors, because she felt such an affinity to the struggle of the African Americans and how she could learn from them, how to help her people there, Palestinians in Bethlehem. So I want to just say, and by the way, I'm planning to do a tour with you guys and bring some of our street outreach guys to Israel and learn from you guys those 12 principles of peace that you have going on. And so I just want you to know, I'm giving you a fair warning. We're coming. And we're coming to learn from you guys as much as you want to learn from us. We believe that there's so much that we can learn from you and your work, the incredible work that you're doing. To your question, um, we did a listening tour, both David and I and my co-founder, for a few years, actually, trying to understand what is it that drives the violence. Why is it that black and brown young men are killing each other? It was like, see, the big difference between here in Chicago and many other cities in the U.S. and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, in here, we're killing each other. I can understand if the black and brown people were killing white people because of all the bad things that white people did to us historically. I could understand that. It'd still be wrong, it'd still be horrific, but black folks are not by and large killing white people in America. It's a genocide, black on black violence, black and brown killing each other. And that's the thing that I just messed up my mind and I couldn't understand it. Of all the progress we've made in terms of educational opportunities, job opportunities, housing opportunities in this country compared to where we were in the days of slavery and the Jim Crow era, segregation, all of that. We have more freedoms, more opportunities now than ever before in our country for black and brown people. So I'm thinking to myself, why is it that we're turning the guns on each other now and killing each other at such a high rate that we never did when we were enslaved or when we were segregated? I just couldn't understand it. And so I decided I'm going to just try to figure this out. And it led me in spending lots and lots of time talking with gang members, sitting with them, whether they're in jail or in prison, or coming out of jail or prison, or just in their homes, talking with their family members, talking with pastors, other pastors in their community, other nonprofit leaders, business leaders. It became clear to us that there are 5 things that we needed to do to get at this issue of violence, and all of them really had to do with strengthening the family, because as you know, the family is the garment of society that holds us together. It's the thread that weaves us all together, and if the family tears apart and breaks apart, so does society, little by little. And so everything we do is about strengthening the family unit, so that if the family is strong, then the community can be strong. If the communities are strong, the cities can be strong. If the cities are strong, the states can be strong. If the states are strong, the the United States are strong, the country is strong. So from a micro level, we said, okay, what can we do to strengthen families that are in high crime, high poverty neighborhoods? One thing we knew was education. We saw that kids who were not reading at a third and sixth grade level were the ones that were most prone to drop out of school, join a gang, and commit a crime. So we looked at that and thought, okay, well, what can we do to help kids stay in school and graduate and go on to college or trade school, and have a life, have a chance? So we said, well, what if we paired up churches with schools, train volunteers in the church, send them into the schools to tutor kids and mentor their parents? And that's exactly what our education achievement initiative does. We're now in 70 public schools across the city in high crime, high poverty neighborhoods. And our goal is to, by next year, get to 100 schools, 100 churches partner together to help intervene in the lives of at-risk youth that are at risk of dropping out of school, joining gangs, committing crimes, and ensuring that not only do they graduate, but also their parents learn how to better parent them and prepare them for success. Because we realize if we just focus on the kids, we might have those kids 1 or 2 hours, a couple times a week. Whereas there's 168 hours in the week, and those kids are going to go back home to their broken homes and dysfunctional families. And that is not a recipe for the maximum success. You might have some success there, but we thought we could maximize the success by also mentoring the parents while we tutor the kids. So that's our program for education. And then we realized part of this gun violence issue, of course, that education one is a preventative one. So we're trying to keep kids out of that river downstream, going towards gun violence. Then there's the helping entrepreneurs, and you know that a lot of these guys that are in gangs, they need to pay the rent and feed themselves and their families, so they're going to do whatever they know to do and whatever they can do to make that happen, which often revolves around guns and drugs and prostitution and all of that. So we said, well, what if we could, if we're going to tell them to put down the guns and drugs and get out of the illegal economy, we've got to help them get into the legal economy. Because, the reality is these guys are entrepreneurs, right? They're just on the wrong side of the law. So what if we tell them, listen, you don't have to lose your hustle. You want to be an entrepreneur? Okay, let us help you understand how to participate in the legal economy, because the illegal economy is not working for you very well. And you're going to end up dead in prison or in a wheelchair. That's the way that road ends. You know it, I know it. So now let me help you, and so we either help them monetize an idea they might have and show them how to, set up a business, a small business, or we take their skills and help them get trained and prepared for a career that they can get into a job and a career track for themselves. Okay, that is in somebody else's company. So, for example, we have a contract with the largest hospital network in Chicago. It's Rush Presbyterian Hospital. They have $500 million of supply chain spending, $500 million, and they're trying to run an anchor mission program, and they're asking us to be the go-between the Black and brown community entrepreneurs and small business owners to them so that they can redirect some of their supply chain spending for products and services that they buy every single day. And so we've been able to do that, being the middleman, bringing the Black and brown communities to the table to do business with a big hospital like Rush Hospital. And so that's economic development. There's a saying in our community that says a good job stops a bullet. So that's the second initiative, is economic development. And then third is the violence reduction strategy itself, which works with former gang chiefs that we recruit to work with us. We retrain them, and then we send them back in the community to recruit the young guys that are still out there gangbanging. And so they are very well respected. They're legends in their own communities. They're sort of the Black and brown Al Capones in their communities. And they have survived prison and death many, many times. Many of them, in fact, all of them, have bullet holes in their bodies, and they've put a lot of bullet holes in other people's bodies, and they spent a lot of time in prison. And now they've come to their senses and realize this is a dead end. I'm fortunate to be alive. What can I do to help rebuild the communities that I once tore down? And so we hire them, retrain them, send them back in the community. They have street cred that I don't have and you don't have. And the young guys will listen to them and trust them to lead them on a path out of the gangs. And so we've got about 30 guys like that now work with us in five of the 20 most violent neighborhoods. And we're hoping to continue to scale. So that's the violence reduction part. We also work with the police, where we train pastors and community leaders to go out with police commanders and knock on the doors of the guys that are still out there as well. So that's another sort of approach to getting to the guys. So we use the gang guys to get to the gang guys who are still in the game, the young guys. And then we use pastors and train those pastors and send them out with the police, who are constantly arresting these young guys. And they go to jail for, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. They get back out, or sometimes they get arrested and they get let out the next day, because the justice system is so messed up here. And so we go visit those guys and we message them. The police gives them a message of warning. We give them a message of hope and help. And tell the guys, look, you call us, one call, we will mobilize whatever resource you need to put the guns and drugs down and get on a path towards health, healing, and prosperity for you and your families. So we do that with the police department. We're in 6 of the 22 districts. We are the official partner with CPD, and we're grateful for that. Fourth initiative is something we call the Gospel Justice Centers. We've got 25 of those around the city now, and those are basically legal aid clinics. So we recruit Christian attorneys, and we put them to work one day a month, usually on a Saturday, for a few hours inside a local church in high crime, high poverty neighborhoods. And those attorneys will see clients that come into the church from the neighborhood who can't otherwise afford good legal counsel. That's affordable to them. And so we give them access to good legal counsel. And we focus on solving civil cases that these people come to us with. And the research tells us that 80 something percent, between 80 and 90% of all the cases in court are civil cases. But if you don't have a lawyer to help you solve that civil case, or you don't have good insight to solve that, good advice, you'll wind up either committing a crime that becomes a criminal issue rather than a civil issue, or that civil issue will just kind of snowball and create more and more problem for you, which then you end up in being justice involved in other ways. So if we can help people solve for the civil issues, that avoids them oftentimes going down the road to do a criminal act. And so now those attorneys are serving in 25 different locations every month, seeing hundreds of clients every month and helping them. And the clients are asked to pay a dignity fee of $30. And I don't know if you've ever sat across the desk of a lawyer for $30, but that usually doesn't happen for $30. It's usually more like $250 an hour. And if they can't afford the $30, we ask them to put something on it. We keep going down until we get to a number that they can afford. It could be 20, it could be 15, $10, whatever. But we want them to have a little skin in the game. And then finally, the fifth initiative is what we call faith community mobilization. So that's where we gather the church from all over the city, rich, poor, middle class, red, yellow, black, and white, mega church, mid-sized church, small churches, to gather together to pray across the city. And we move it around every year. So we might be city center, north side, west side, south side. And so we get churches on this sort of calendar year of events and activity together. So we pray together in the winter time. We train together in the spring. We do outreach together in the summer. And then we do fellowship events in the fall. So we have about 170 churches in our network now that have all said, we want to do something to be part of the solution to the violence issue in Chicago?
You specifically talked about the intentionality of working with the police. The last few years, we've had awareness raised for things like the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as police brutality. And then we've also seen a kickback of that, different forms of people trying to speak out about things they're passionate about. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the decision intentionally to work with the police and some about those tensions that you may find within the communities that you serve in and their relationship with the police, and then as well as your own organization's relationship as well as the communities that you work with.
Great questions, David. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little story before I dive a little deeper in the question, because this story sets the context of your question. So I'm sure you guys know, and many of your listeners may have heard about the Great Chicago Fire. All right, in the 1800s, late 1800s, I think it was. We even have a soccer team, right? Our MLS team is called the Chicago Fire because of that great historic fire that literally burned the city to the ground at the time when most buildings were made of wood. Even boardwalks and sidewalks were made of wood across the city and burned down to the ground. All right. Now imagine if a fire started right now. New York, a fire starts where you're at. You look outside your window and you see the smoke, you see the flames, it's coming down the street. Just imagine if that was happening and you run out into the street, you see all your neighbors, people around you there, pandemonium everywhere. And somebody runs up to you and says, "Hey, what are we going to do about this fire? We need help putting out this fire. Are you Democrat or Republican? Because we need all the Republicans to help put out this fire." Do you think that's a question you would get? Are you Baptist or Pentecostal? Because we need all the Baptists to put out this fire. Are you black, white, or Hispanic? Because we need all the... No. When there's a fire and it's coming to the neighborhood, the fire isn't asking any questions about labels, because the fire cares about one thing: something to consume. So the people who are in danger of a fire coming to them, they're not even for 1 second concerned about who it is that's going to be right next to them fighting this fire. No, those questions of labels and affiliations don't matter. All that matters is, do you have something in your hand that can help us put out this fire? Is it a squirt gun? Is it a super soaker? Is it a garden hose? Is it a fire hydrant? It is a cup. As long as it's not an accelerant, we want you in this battle right now, because this fire is coming for all of us. The issue of gun violence is like a fire. And when bullets fly, people die. And bullets have no names on them. And so the scale of the violence had gotten so bad in Chicago that people stopped caring about Democrats, Republican, Baptist, Methodist, Jews, Muslims, black, white, Hispanic. They didn't care about any of that. Only thing they cared about is, do you have a solution to this big problem, and can you help? That's the only question. Because everybody in Chicago either knows someone or knows someone that knows someone that's been shot, killed, or maimed by gun violence. That's how bad it is. So with that said as the backdrop, you need to know that Together Chicago, we understood from the very beginning. In fact, we read a paper when we were just getting started. We read a paper published by Stanford University about collective impact. And it basically said in this research paper that no lasting social change has ever been accomplished without the work of collaboration and collective impact across many sectors. So we saw that, and it just kind of struck a nerve with my co-founder and I, and we thought, absolutely. Why shouldn't we work together? Because we don't have all the answers, and we don't have all the resources to even make a dent in this problem. So let's just throw the door open and start asking people, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why do you think, what do you think is working? and just put a plan together and start going at it. And we found, because the problem was so great and people were so sick and tired of being sick and tired and watching the news every day, people were so receptive and so willing and so open to work with us because we had a bit of a plan and we had some resources. And they're like, well, here, how about this? And so people were like excited that finally there was an organization, a backbone organization that were bringing people together to work on this problem together. And people love that. Donors love to see that. And then the police department loved, and the mayor, they're like, wow, the mayor and the police department finally admitted within the last, I would say, 15 years, they said, we cannot police this city without the community intervening and collaborating with the mayor's office, the police department, the fire department, etc. And when you have government officials that say, no matter how much billions of dollars of revenue we have in tax revenue and all the agencies we have as government agencies, we still can't fix this problem without the community. We need the faith community. We need the other nonprofit communities. We need the social service agencies. And we're going to help fund you guys, and we're going to work and collaborate and think together and create structure and plan. And so the police department, they are just excited about our partnership. The mayor's office excited about what we're doing. And again, nobody's calling the ACLU saying there's got to be a separation of church and state, because the ACLU understands that they can't fix this problem. And we're not forcing anybody to become Christians to work with us, but we're saying we've got to think differently. We've got to come together. We've got to put aside these petty issues, because the gun violence, the bullets don't care about that stuff. I really think that this is sort of like a window of opportunity that God has opened, and we see it, and a bunch of other people see it, and we're trying to, steward that opportunity well.
The importance and necessity of building those coalitions across lines of difference. That's in some ways how we talk about peacemaking. It's collaboration across lines of difference for the common good. Recognizing, as you discussed and as you named, that our futures are tied together. What happens to my neighbor impacts me, and I can't live a flourishing life if my neighbor doesn't have enough. Right? Eventually, that's going to come and impact me. And so the only future for all of us is a future where all of us have the dignity and security and freedom that we need. That's how we talk about our work in Israel Palestine. We frame it in this context of mutual flourishing, that there need to be equal measures of dignity and security and freedom for Israelis and Palestinians alike. And that's true here in the U.S. And it's, part of the way that we have, part of the reason why we've begun to do programming also in our own country, giving people the opportunity to better understand our past so we can write a new future, recognizing the way that our futures are intertwined. We have to see each other as neighbors if we're going to move forward. And that means building these coalitions across these lines of difference. So I think that's so powerful. Really quickly, any last thoughts or invitations, maybe I should say, for our network before we wrap up from you, as we think about how to engage as peacemakers in this work of transforming gun violence?
Let me just say to our listeners, first of all, again, thank you for tuning in. This is such an important conversation to have. And I want to remind everybody that the news that you watch on television, radio, whatever, wherever you get your news from, whenever violence is among the subjects of the newscasts, just know that that's not the final word. Know that the end is not that. And there are many people who are working together. And so if you want to know the bright spots, you want to know the encouraging stories about what God is doing in cities across America to address this issue of gun violence, your news isn't going to be the only place to hear about violence. And it's usually not very encouraging. So just know that there are a lot of encouraging things happening. A lot of good things are happening in that space. Often doesn't get reported, but you can go to Together Chicago and we'll even list a lot of our partners that we work with here in the city. And you can see amazing testimonies and stories. So you can be encouraged to know that there are people on the front line, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and atheists alike, that are working side by side in the trenches to make a difference, and to promote peace, to seek peace and reconciliation.
We will be definitely sharing some links to your website and some of the things that you're doing so folks can learn more and find ways to support you and translate the work you're doing into their own communities, right? As I mentioned earlier, all of us have agency and all of us have responsibility, as our third practice of peacemaking says, to be a part of this transformative work. So folks, I hope you take that invitation to heart, and let us know what you get up to. We'd like to be encouraged as well. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. As always, you can read and share the principles and practices of peacemaking. And follow Telos and Together Chicago on Instagram. I'll include a link in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the show, become a monthly donor to Telos. All of this happens because of the generosity of our listeners and our network. But with that, we want to thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.